Thank you, Mia, for setting us up there. So we can start by talking about our partner companies' EVPs and specifically how they're defined and connected to benefits. So just to frame our conversation today, let's go ahead and use this definition of EVP. EVPs being the unique set of benefits that employees receive in return for skills, capabilities, experience, and everything else that they bring to the organization. So when we asked our partner companies about how important benefits were to their respective EVPs, we found some unexpected divergence. So as you can see, the companies were split 40-60 in terms of who regarded benefits as important or unimportant to different extents. And as you can see, the companies who found benefits important generally found them extremely important. So we want to take a deeper dive into how our partner companies are defining their EVP and benefits role with regards to them. And these definitions will hopefully help us see why we kind of see some of this divergence. So before we get into that, firstly, we found across the board that EVP has to do with three kind of factors that boil down to culture, well-being, mission, and purpose. Culture we found cited the most. And then, of course, additionally to that, mission and purpose being working for a purposeful organization with impactful work, and well-being being such a serious topic right now in terms of holistic well-being. So overall, EVP seem to be the general experience that one has at an organization. But benefits were mentioned as a fourth major aspect of the EVP, but there were two major approaches to where benefits came in. Firstly, we saw benefits as foundational to EVP. So like the quote says, make or break for culture, which was a highly cited aspect of EVP. And so benefits were incredibly influential across those different factors and served as a foundation central to employee experience in EVP. And then there was a second major approach. For other companies, benefits were more so a component and tool to kind of bring the EVP to life, not regarded as a distinct part of the employee experience. So, for example, one partner company considered themselves extremely competitive with benefits, but deemed benefits as kind of separate from the day-to-day employee experience. Another firm stated that for them, competing on the grounds of benefits and compensation just wouldn't be sustainable or realistic, and so relied more on the type of work employees engaged in or mission and purpose, as you see there, as a differentiator. So all that being said, it seems that companies with average or benchmarked or below average, perhaps benefits ranges, might rely on a different aspect of EVP to kind of differentiate themselves as a firm. Then when we take a step back and we asked our partner companies, well, what are these factors that are most influencing this EVP that you advance? We found four major categories. And as you can see, culture was kind of the largest, as it is so overarching, from families to stability and flexibility in work, to kind of broader organizational components like DEI and ESG. Culture was very much a prominent part of influencing EVP. Then, of course, benefits, as we mentioned, came up in a variety of ways: healthcare, both at and above requirements, and all forms of compensation and PTO, as you might expect. But then, of course, career development was also a major factor, trajectory, and the nature of the work itself, especially for firms that, as we mentioned, didn't feel they could differentiate themselves with rewards and compensation alone. And then finally, some interesting structural factors came up as well, such as unionization status within the employee population, and just bottom line and cost outcomes related to EVP, as well as just the sustainability of programming. And so overall, we saw this trend also of EVPs really being flexible and honestly dependent on key moments in employees' lives. So speaking of that and flexibility, let's talk a bit more about what change looks like at the benefits level. I'll go ahead and pass it to Skylar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Naomi. So as Naomi was mentioning, we really examined this link between EVP and benefits. We wanted to see how well this tracked into kind of the change-making process. Are EVPs and benefits changed at similar times, or are they completely independent of one another? And we largely found that there isn't much of a connection between EVP change cycles and benefits change cycles. Now, one of the key reasons that we were hearing for this is that EVP is really closely tied to brand or identity of a company. It needs to be very ingrained in the company's culture in order to be really successful. and changing something that's culturally impactful more often than not will disrupt it a little bit. So it needs to be left untouched for a while in order to do its thing. Whereas benefits can be reviewed very regularly and you can see changes are made as needed. And that's exactly what we're seeing from our partner companies. More often than not, they will look for benchmark data or employee feedback and then make small tweaks or additions in order to meet employees' needs or remain competitive. And expanding on what changes are based off of in benefits, that benchmarking and employee feedback point, those two are definitely the highest that we're seeing. They're very frequent drivers of change. But we're also seeing things like utilization rates and claim data, being able to figure out how often people are actually utilizing the benefits that we're giving them. Costs, costs are huge. They always will be in the benefits space. And then alignment with culture and values is another big one. Going back to what Naomi said, EVP and benefits have a really great opportunity to align and drive home what the company wants to promote culturally. So we also wanted to dive in a little bit deeper into our different partner companies and examine, what their quote unquote signature benefits are in this vein. And for the purpose of this presentation, we've defined signature benefits as more or less key benefits that differentiate a company from their competitors. So things that ideally on the labor market, potential candidates will be very attracted to, or things that keep employees at the company. Now we've highlighted a few here, main buckets being financial, leave, medical, and wellness. We will be providing a more expansive list of all of the different signature benefits we heard to our partner companies when we send out our full PowerPoint deck. But for the purpose of this presentation, we wanted to boil it down a little bit. The big thing about these is some are much more common than more common than others. Excuse me. Like different medical plans in the US are required by every competitor or every company, but different companies are pushing them to different levels and offering higher and higher options, like limitless plans, expanded women's health offerings, et cetera. Whereas other benefits are much more unique. We're seeing a lot of potential push for work flexibility, mental health coverage. We're seeing things like emergency childcare services and access to cultural institutions as really good draw factors as well. And I know that I said all of these things are really looked at from a differentiating perspective, but many of the companies who talked about their signature benefits also mentioned they're not just meant to differentiate, they are really made to make employees' lives better in a tangible way. They really wanted the things that their company is associated with from a benefits perspective to impact their employees and make them both better at work and better in their personal lives. Reflecting on what Naomi said earlier about diversity, equity, and inclusion and environmental social governance, we also wanted to examine how those really fit into the offerings that are being provided on the market. And while we didn't see quite as much of a link with ESG and benefits, DEI and benefits is huge. Right now there is generally a very large focus on DEI, and I'm sure you're hearing that in a lot of discussions in the workplace as well. We're seeing that a lot of these DEI inclusion points occur when creating or reviewing different benefits offerings and policies throughout the benefits lifecycle. And there is a very prevalent aim to achieve either benefits inclusion or benefits equity, depending on where companies are in their DEI journey. We're seeing this both at the domestic level with companies in the US really looking to ensure that different employee groups or different states are given similar benefits. And internationally, we're looking at companies who really want to make sure that they have a standard that's applied to every single workplace on the globe, which we think is really fascinating. And we'll jump into some of the challenges of that later. We're also noticing a very tangible increase of DEI-focused benefits. And some of those I've listed here, specifically like gender-affirming procedures are a little bit more unique, but adoption, surrogacy, disability, these are all being expanded in order to be more equitable to the broad majority of people. And then looking over to best practices, we were able to boil down our partner companies' practices and give some recommendations. The first big one is that we're seeing a lot of DEI benefits execution is really tied to company values, right? This goes back to my point about being on the DEI journey. If a company is really engrossed in DEI and is really trying to push DEI as a big part of their culture or their EVP, they're going to be really on top of this as it relates to benefits. Whereas other companies, maybe it's not quite as high up a priority, maybe we're still securing funding, something like that. You won't see DEI and benefits quite as closely tied together, excuse me. We're also seeing that DEI is a very structural component when applied in a strong way, right? It's not supplementary to certain conversations, but rather included in every single major process when creating or reviewing different benefits. And then with that, we are seeing a push for more retroactive reviews of benefits to make sure that they're DEI compliant. It's great to implement a really solid benefit, but if you're not going back and looking at it 1, 3, 5 years later to ensure that it's still being applied and received equitably, then you might be missing out on some pretty considerable DEI moments. We're also, of course, looking to seek to lift the voices of DEI teams and ERGs and make sure that they're included and wanted in all of these discussions. And then working with supportive partners or vendors that really fulfill your own mission, right? Your money in the market means a lot in fulfilling your own cultural values. So making sure that your partners are also interested in the same things that you are, and also, respecting your employees is really huge. Now, to close out this section, we wanted to look at a lot of the current quote unquote grand challenges that we're seeing in the benefits space. And the biggest one by far is communication. Communication around benefits is incredibly complex. I'm sure if you work in the benefit space, the more benefits you have, the more coverage you'll have and the more offerings you have. But there's so much more complexity. And as you continue to offer different vendors for different benefits and maybe niche offerings, there are just more and more pathways that your end user has to understand. So figuring out how to help employees understand what's available to them and how to get it when they need it are very, very important. Not only, in your employees' lives, potentially they're seeking a really needed benefit, but also just in their appreciation of the company and appreciation of what they're being compensated with as a part of their benefits package. We're also seeing administrative complexity, right? Naomi was talking about before that union versus non-union workforce, a company who may want to have completely equal benefits across all of its employees might be barred by a bargaining agreement that stipulates unionized workers have slightly different benefits. So there's always a consideration there. And then also looking at geographical differences, as I spoke about before, both domestically and global, and also how different cultural expectations fit into the offering and allocation of different benefits. Also, of course, we have cost. Budget is always going to be something to fight against in the benefits space. And rising prices make that even more difficult, especially in areas like healthcare that's legally required, but prices keep rising. And then there is a little bit of discussion around whether or not ROI is a reliable or an unreliable metric for tracking benefits, which again, we'll talk about a little bit later. And lastly here, I just want to highlight that generational differences are very on the mind, especially looking at the far end of the spectrum between baby boomers and Gen Z. A lot of companies who have their benefits structured towards maybe pensions or other offerings that are really attractive to baby boomers are now trying to figure out how do we adapt that to Gen Z and make it attractive without having completely unequitable and separate benefits plans. And that's a very unique challenge.